In the first video of this series, we talked about our goal, which is to get our YouTube data into Power BI. We also did a little research on the YouTube reporting API. Now it's time to begin building an application that's going to interface with the YouTube reporting API and download our data. All right, so the first step in actually getting an application built is to complete the authentication process. Now, once again, Google has or is using the OAuth 2 protocol. And one of the steps that needs to be completed here is our application itself needs to authenticate. So we need credentials for our application to authenticate. To make that happen, I'm going to go over to the developer console that YouTube or Google makes available, and we're going to create a new project. Now, you can just navigate to console.developers.google.com, and there's a couple of ways to get to the new project. But if you hit this top drop down, you will find a create project option. Now I'm just going to create a demo project here because I already have one created, and I don't want to change all that on my end. So I'm just going to step through this by creating a temp project. I'm going to call it temp YT for YouTube. And I'll create that. Now, as soon as you create a project, you're going to be redirected to a library of available APIs. Now, of course, what we need access to here is the YouTube APIs. So we're going to be declaring that now. So I'm going to scroll down here, down to the YouTube area, and I'm going to include all three of these APIs, starting with the data API. I'm going to click that and then select Enable. I do the same thing for the other two APIs. So I'm going to go back to the library. I'm going to scroll back down to YouTube, select the YouTube Analytics API, enable that one. And I'm going to do it one more time. This time, selecting the Reporting API and enable. Okay, so now what we're doing here is we're declaring which APIs our application is going to be using. We have not been granted access to those APIs yet by any user. So we're just declaring what we need access to. Now, again, what we're trying to do here is complete the authentication process. And to do so, we have to authenticate our application. We need actually to have credentials. So I'm going to click on this Create Credentials button. There's a couple of different ways to do this. You don't have to follow this little wizard if you don't want to. You can actually select credentials here on the left and maybe get it done a little quicker, but I'll go ahead and follow the wizard. All right, so the first question, or the first thing we're doing here is trying to figure out what type of credentials do we need. We need OAuth 2 credentials, but I'll go ahead and answer these questions. It says, which API are you using? You can select any of the three that we've requested access to. And then it says, where will you be calling the API from? These descriptions were a little confusing to me, but the short of it here is you need to select this other UI. That'll get you where you want to be. And then the important selection is this user data. We're going to be requesting access to user data, meaning that this is data that me as a user of YouTube, typically I have to be authenticated to see this in my YouTube analytics. So that's what we want is user data. And I click what credentials do I need? And it figures out that I need OAuth 2 credentials. All right, well, that's great. We knew that. I'm going to give this a name, anything you like. And then I'll click Create ID. Now, this next question here is not extremely important, but it's kind of nice to put a descriptive name in your console here, because this name is going to be seen by anybody that you are asking to have access to their YouTube channel analytics. So you'll see that in a bit, but I'll just put in YouTube data collector. And there are other options here. I'm going to skip all those for now. And I'm going to click continue. And then it gives you the option to download your credentials. You're going to want to do this. You're going to be downloading a JSON file. And inside of this JSON file, is where your actual client ID and your client secret are stored. So if you're following along, go ahead and download this file. All right, so I want to point out one more thing here before I leave the developer console, and that's the API quotas. I've switched over now to a project that I'm actually using already, so we have some usage to show. So I'm in the dashboard here of the API manager, and I'm going to select my reporting or the reporting API. Now, in here, it's going to, of course, present how much usage you've had over some period of time. You can see here I'm looking at 30 days, and it's showing me my usage of different types. I'm going to go ahead and move to the quotas area. And the quotas are kind of spread out here. Like, for example, here's your free request area. And it's telling you free requests per day are 20,000 requests per day for free. And then the more important one, at least I found to be more important was the free request per 100 seconds. So every 100 seconds, you can get 100 free requests, which basically comes down to 1 per second. But it's only tracked at the 100-second interval. So that's an important one. And then you have discovery requests, which is also tracked on a per 100-second interval, and you get 17,000 of those requests. So just you might want to look at the different APIs. They have different quotas. Like the data API, it has a much higher quota. Let me jump over here real quick to show you. And these might change, so you're going to want to check this whenever you're building your application. But you got queries per day. You can submit 1 million queries per day to the data API. Queries per 100 seconds, you can get 300,000 per 100 second per user, or queries per 100 seconds overall is 3 million. So anyway, that's where all the quotas are. Okay, so now we have created a project within our Google Developer Console, and we've requested, or we've declared, I should say, that we need to have access to 3 different YouTube APIs. We also downloaded a JSON file which has our particular APIs, our particular project's client ID and a client secret within that JSON file. It's just in plain text. You can look at the text in any text editor. Now I'm in Visual Studio, and what I've decided to do is to build a console application. So that's what I'm going to be working on here. It's just a simple way of completing this requirement, which is to interface with the API. I don't really need a user interface. So one of the first things we need to do is to gain access to the client libraries that we're going to be using. And you can probably see that I'm using .NET. So I'm going to be accessing the client libraries that Google makes available for .NET. To do that, I'm going to use the NuGet project package manager. Excuse me, the NuGet package manager. So I go over here, right click on my project and select NuGet package manager, and I look at what's installed. So I've already installed this. And frankly, all of these, I believe, were dependents. If you simply select the YouTube API reporting version 1, I'm pretty sure that all of the rest of these projects that you see listed here are dependents for that project. But in any case, just make sure that you install each of these libraries because you're going to need to set references to them. Now, another thing you need to do is to get that JSON file that you downloaded, add it to your project. And you can do that by just right-clicking and add a new item, and you can navigate to that JSON file. Now, the important thing here is that you want to make sure that JSON file stays as part of your project whenever you're building. So the way you do that is after you add the JSON file to your project, you're going to select it and then go to Properties. I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see it, maybe. Still pretty small, but you're going to set the build action to content. That's what's important here. Set the build action to content, and then the copy output directory to copy if newer. So just make sure you have those two property values set. All right, so now we've included our JSON file as part of our project, and we've added the libraries that we need from the NuGet project manager or package manager. Now we need to set some references. So we have a number of different things we need to add here. So if you starting at the top, you got system IO. We're going to be working with the file system, so make sure you have a reference to system IO. System threading you'll need. You don't need Google APIs. You could forget that one, but you do need Google APIs download. This is what makes it a lot easier to download these CSV files that are be coming out of the reporting API. Of course, we're going to need the Google APIs Auth 2. And you got two different references here for the reporting, version 1. Then you got a service reference. This is used whenever we actually create an instance of these different services. Then you have the this file data store. So what's going to happen here is we're going to be creating a local access, a refresh token and an access token. And we'll talk about this in just a bit, but this particular file data store is used to create that file, which is going to hold our access and refresh token. Then you have your YouTube API version 3. This is for the data API, which you'll see in a bit. This is what we're going to use to actually get the metadata we need. Then you have the SQL client. In my particular application here, what I'm doing is I'm using SQL Server to store some information. So I need to be able to establish a connection, and that's why I'm using the SQL client. Okay, now let's take a look at how we actually authenticate. I'm not gonna go through and type this out while you're watching here. I'm not good enough to make that happen, but I have successfully completed this build, so I'm going to show you how we can authenticate. All right, so I'm going to make a copy of this project available for you so you can read through the details as much as you like. But I want to point a couple of things out here when we're talking about the authentication process. And that is, first of all, that we are going to be creating a set of credentials. Using this word multiple times here, but in this case we're creating an instance of a set of credentials. And you can see here that what we're doing is we're calling this Google Web Authorization Broker.authorize async. And that's going to return us our credentials that we're going to be using to access both the data API and the reporting API. Now, in the arguments that we're passing in here, you can see that the first one here is our Google Client Secrets.load stream. So the Google Client Secrets, this is actually the file, the JSON file that we just added to our project. So you can see here we got a file stream set up. It's pointing to my client secret JSON. This has our client ID and our client secret in it. This is our credentials for our project. Now, once we have that added as an argument to this authorize async, we then need to request access to particular scopes. And again, these are just resources that we need to have access to. So I've included here a number of different scopes. I've got 4 for the data API, and then we have 2 for the reporting API. Let's see, the rest of this is pretty straightforward. This is the file data store that I was talking about a minute ago. It's asking us what do we want to call the file data store. And again, this is where our refresh token and our access token are going to be stored. One of the characteristics of this OAuth 2 process is that we're only going to have to request access to these scopes, APIs, resources, one time. And from that point forward, our application is going to be able to access those resources without asking a user to access them again. So that requires us to store some secrets on our side so we don't have to re-ask that question. Now, the access token expires. I think it's every 24 hours or something like that. Maybe it's less. But the access token expires, so we have to have a way of actually refreshing that token. So one of the other things we're going to get back from this credential request is a refresh token. And the client library is going to really take care of all of this for us, or most of this for us. The refresh token will be used to get a new access token should that access token expire. All right, so that's enough on the authentication piece. Once we have our credentials back, then we use them to create instances of different services. So you can see here, we're creating an instance of the YouTube reporting service, and then here we're creating an instance of the YouTube service. And if I scroll down here a little bit just to show you what's involved there, all we're doing is we're saying that we're using our credentials again. We already have created an instance of our credentials, so we're using those credentials 2 different times. One's here for the reporting service and one's down here below for the YouTube service. We're passing in those credentials and we're giving the application a name. I just put in here Leapfrog BI YouTube Data Collector. You can put whatever you like. And at that point, we have 2 services available to us, 2 instances of services available. And that's what we need to go to the next step, which is actually get the data we need back. All right, now what I want to do is I want to show you how this authentication process looks. It's a lot easier to demonstrate than to explain. It's really pretty straightforward. Now, before I can do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the access and refresh token that I already have on this machine because I want to actually re-authenticate. The authentication process will not happen again as long as this authentication, or as long as these tokens are already available. So I'm actually going to delete this token, and you can see where the token's being stored. It's called YouTube API because that's what I gave my file data store name. That's what I said my file data store name would be. But it's stored here in app data /roaming, and I have a YouTube API folder. So I've deleted the token that's currently in there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up a command window so I can access this application and authenticate. Okay, so I have my command window open. I've changed my directory over to where my compiled code is actually stored. And I'm about to call the application, and I'm passing in an argument that's called report type list. Don't worry about the argument at this point. We're just wanting to demonstrate the authentication process here. All right, so when I hit enter, it recognizes that the application does not yet, I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller so we can see it, or sorry, a little bit bigger. The application does not yet have the authentication it needs to access the resources that it needs to return a report type list in this case. So what it does is it opens up a browser for me, and it's asking me to select an account that I want to use to complete this grant access to the application. Now, this is actually really important here. You may or may not have multiple accounts listed, but if you do, make sure that you select the, in my case, the brand account that's associated with the YouTube channel that you want to grant access to the analytics. When I first went through this process, I selected the owner of the channel, which is the top account you see listed here. What you actually need to do is select the actual brand account, which in my case is this bottom option. That was very difficult to troubleshoot, at least for me, because I was getting no data back from the API, and it's because the non-brand channel, it actually is not even a channel at all, it's just an owner. So I was getting no data back and couldn't figure out why. So be sure you select the brand account that you want to collect analytics data from. Now, the next thing is you have this window that's asking for access to particular scopes, and it says here, YouTube report collector would like to, and it's saying it would like to have access to all of these different resources. And I'm going to be able to say allow, and that's what I'm going to do. So you can imagine what's happening now is that I'm authenticated as a certain user. My application has been authenticated as an application via the project, And now I'm telling YouTube that I am going to allow this application access to these resources. So I click allow, and the window goes away. Now, if I go back to my command window, I can see that I actually do have a list of report types listed. Now, if I go over to my file system, I can also see that I have my tokens recreated, what I deleted just a minute ago. So at this point, the authentication process is complete. My application is authenticated. My user, in my case, it's the Leapfrog BI channel, brand account, it has been authenticated and has granted authorization to the application to gain access to this user data, which is the YouTube analytics data. Okay, so now we've completed the authentication process. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and build out this application so that we can request reports and download those reports.